It's a matter of saying the total capability that I need, as envisioned by this number of platforms with this number of weapons, requiring this amount of sustainment, that ought to be foundational. Absent that, we're always going to be reacting to the latest thing.
And it's hard to do that in a document like a national defense strategy that has like 18 pages or something, or 30 pages, and has no numbers in it whatsoever.
Well, and also changes constantly.
Every 2-4 years, yes.
Every few years. So I applaud the idea of a Center for Maritime Strategy, for example. I think that is a great thing. Also,
Thank you. We do too.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd just throw that in there since I'm here at your house.
Hello, everyone. This is Admiral Jamie Foggo from the Center for Maritime Strategy at the Navy League of the United States, just outside Washington, D.C. You're listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategy's podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. Thank you to Dataminr for sponsoring Season 4 of Maritime Nation. We're honored today to be joined by Dr. Bradley Martin.
Hi.
Dr. Martin, welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Martin is a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. He retired from the Navy as a surface warfare captain after 30 years of noble service, including 4 command tours. In addition to his operational tours, Dr. Martin served on the staff of U.S. Forces Japan, the OpNav staff as an operations analyst in the Pentagon, and most recently as the Navy coordinator for participation in Joint Staff and OSD requirements and resources forums. His subspecialties include operations research, operational logistics, and strategic planning. Prior to joining the Navy, he achieved a doctorate in political science from the University of Michigan while working as a research assistant for the Correlates of War project. His work at RAND focuses on Navy force structure. He just wrote this excellent paper, The United States Navy Force Structure, which we've got here today as a basis for our discussion, and I would commend it to all of you. I think this is available publicly.
It
right,
is,
Dr.
yes,
Martin?
off the website.
Outstanding. And his research focuses on the capabilities, supply chain security, resilience, and national security. So we're going to have a good discussion today about force structure and how we actually build a battle force and maintain a battle force. Brad, welcome to Maritime Nation.
Delighted to be here. I'm honored at the opportunity.
And Steve, you and Brad go back a long way, longer than me. Did you have any comments about
yes, we
his
do.
career?
No, Brad thinks very deeply about these subjects. He and I regularly trade opinions and occasional barbs on another site called sailorbob.com.
I love that site.
But it's been very educational, and Brad is always full of great recommendations, and he's the first person who recommended that I read sort of the foundational document of the McNamara period of defense acquisition, How Much is Enough? And Brad recommended that book, and it's the best way to understand what Mr. McNamara was trying to do. So I'm grateful for that. I'm glad he's here. He's also one of our authors from returning from Ebb Tide, our new book on renewing the commercial maritime enterprise. So glad to have him aboard today.
I'm really delighted, and I'm full of something. I'm not sure opinion is the right.
No, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning the book, Steve. Dr. Wills, our navalist, did a wonderful job editing this volume for the Center for Maritime Strategy, which was published with Marine Corps University Press. Mm-hmm. The reason I tell you that is there's a hard copy of the book. We've gone through a first printing and a second printing, and we have a few hard copies here in the headquarters, but you can get it for free online as a PDF, if you like, at either Marine Corps University Press's website, if you Google that, or www.centerformaritimestrategy.org, and you'll find the book listed, and you can download a PDF, and I highly recommend it. We've gotten a lot of feedback, mostly good feedback, and we're looking forward to our next volume.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, super. Let's get on with the questions for Dr. Martin. Sir, can you please outline the United States Navy's current force structure? You know, a lot of folks that are out there, we have listeners all over the country in 170 different councils of the Navy League, 30,000 members in CONUS and OCONUS. And the shifting tides of ships and classes of ships that we build and numbers of ships that we have. Sometimes those numbers go up, sometimes they go down. So this is kind of a primer for the audience of what does Navy's current force structure look like? What is America's fleet designed and built to accomplish? And what are the challenges with this existing force, particularly in the post-Cold War era? Can you enlighten us?
Certainly. The current U.S. Navy is oriented toward carrying out a high-end conflict. It is built with a lot of high-end capabilities. We have things like the Virginia-class submarines, extremely capable platform. We're introducing Ford-class carriers. We have a large number of surface combatants. Mm-hmm. But these are all high-end forces that we would think that we might use if we had to fight a war with some peer adversary. That's a fine thing to do, but I think the challenge with that is that historically the U.S. Navy has had a very strong role in projecting power at distance over a long, worldwide, and in places where other forces might not be really able to go. And I think, but the challenge that we are facing is that the op tempo of the Navy is significant.
Oh, absolutely.
Greater than it ever was. But at the same time, the force structure, the ships that are there are very capable. The aircraft that are there are very capable. But the demand is greater than it can meet with that type of force.
Yes.
So I think among the things that we'll talk about today is how we need to orient the force towards something that's capable of responding at a lower level, because that is certainly what the Chinese are doing.
Right. It's kind of, as you say in the paper, below threshold of war.
Below the threshold of war. And just as a bit of intellectual context, when I was getting my PhD, when the Earth was still cooling, a volume had come out called Force Without War by Stephen Blackman and Barry Kaplan, or I actually got the names reversed there. They showed that the Navy, the U.S. Navy, responded at levels below war more than any other service. Mm-hmm. So throughout the Cold War, whenever there was a need to respond, the Navy had options which it could provide to the National Command Authority. The problem that we are facing right now is a smaller and smaller number of that type of capability to respond.
Yeah, I mean, as evidenced most recently by, I think since October 7th and the war between Hamas and Israel, we've deployed no less than 7 aircraft carrier battle groups to the Eastern Mediterranean or to the Middle East. And in some cases, we have had to gap the Indo-Pacific.
We have.
Thankfully, our allies have been there to fill that gap with the Italian carrier Cavour and the F-35, the French Charles de Gaulle and her Rafale fighters, and most recently, and just had a port visit in Singapore, the UK or the Royal Navy's Prince of Wales is out there, and she's got the F-35 embarked too. So that has been a big help to Indo-PACOM, while American carriers have had to swing from the Pacific to the Middle East to deter Iran from attacks on Israel. And so to your point, even with a 11, 12 carrier force, we're still strapped now because of maintenance requirements to share the wealth across multiple combatant commands. Mm-hmm. Well, how did the Navy settle on fleet design? What was the Navy's bureaucratic interests, and are there analytical studies to back this up? I mean, carriers, destroyers, we let the frigates go. Now we're trying to build a frigate. Meanwhile, littoral combat ship, and we'll talk about that today, has not turned out the way that we all envisioned it under the tutelage of Admiral Clark when he was CNO as part of his strategy. And then the amphibs, and that's a hot button issue, and it gets highly emotional with the Marines. That's bread and butter for amphibious operations, something I called and coined amphibiosity during Baltops in 15, 16, and it's stuck. Mm-hmm. So how's the Navy impact strategic thinking back into force structure planning and design? Can you enlighten us there?
Certainly. The Navy developed this force structure largely as a matter of accretion. Mm-hmm. I don't think it ever actually made the decision that it wanted to get to this type of force structure. It was more a case of, we have to balance the budget. We have to figure out a way to to deal with the immediate future. And as a result, we're not thinking, we're not planning, we're not programming the types of ships that would help fill this niche that we're talking about. Now, there are certainly analytic studies. A force structure assessment comes out every couple of years, and it states a number. The Navy tries to build to that number, but fundamentally, it always runs up against the problem of program and budgeting. And ultimately, what comes to pass is that some things are going to slip. Now, one thing that is really stressing the force structure today is that the place where it's always easiest to cut is in sustainment, and we have seen the impacts of that on the surface fleet. And we've been seeing that for the last, since the Belial report first elucidated these things. So what I would say is that there's been an effort on the part of the Navy to think analytically about these things. I was in 81 for most of it.
Same here. We're both veterans of N81. I love that organization.
And we certainly tried to think about things in an analytic manner.
Right.
But fundamentally, we would come up against the problem of there's only so much to go around. The big problem, which again is addressed in this report, and which Steve has actually highlighted a number of different times, is the strategic thought that goes into what do we need the Navy to do is absent from a lot of the discussion. And that has happened for a number of different reasons. But I think the really fundamental thing that needs to happen now is the nation has to figure out what it wants its Navy to do. Once that happens, it is much easier to construct a force structure that makes sense. Another issue that has come up is because the shipbuilding enterprise has been so troubled, it's been hard to add to force structure. We can't complete, we'll talk about LCS and perhaps the frigates. We can't complete the programs that we've started other than the DDG-51s, which we've been building since the 90s.
We're doing really well on DDG-51s.
DDG-51s.
Flight 3, they know how to do it, economies of scale and shipyard learning curves. It's all excellent.
Yeah, it's all excellent. So we've got a number of really, really capable ships that are way in excess of what we would need to go do African partnership stations.
Right.
That kind of thing.
That's where we need a frigate.
That's where we need a frigate. So the business of injecting strategic thought back into what the Navy ought to be doing, Steve and I disagree on a lot of things, but we agree pretty violently on that one. That this is something that really needs to be done.
And it doesn't have to, when we say maritime strategy, it doesn't have to look like the 1980s one. That's just an example of kind of how you can do it. It's not the exact blueprint. So as Brad says, if you know what you want your Navy to do and where you want that to happen, that in turn then should inform how many ships you have, what types of ships you have, and what campaigns and operations in peace and war that they do. And we just don't have that.
We don't have that. And as a result, we also can't really program what sustainment should look like.
Exactly.
And as a result of that, we are losing the ability to generate sustainment. The types of shipyards, the type of people, those are in short supply. And they're in short supply because we can't generate a consistent demand signal.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, great point. And I hear about consistent demand signal from the defense primes all the time. Sierra Space, we bring everybody together, and that is a theme that every shipyard and every major defense contractor dreams of. Just give us a steady demand signal. I'm a big proponent of block buys so that you can program out ship construction for decades and not 2 or 3 years at a time. And that's a goal, and perhaps that's a goal that this administration and some of the new leadership coming in, Admiral Foggo, of course, a great friend of the center, had his hearing on the Hill yesterday. He did quite well, and I look forward to him taking the mantle of leadership and moving us forward. Let me go back to a couple of things you said, Brad. So you talked about force structure assessments. I'm very familiar with those from my time in the Pentagon, and particularly at N81 with Trip Barber, who's just a master of operations analysis and is now a member of the commission, Congressional Commission on the United States Navy, which are trying to get underway. So force structure assessment is one thing. I lived through a number of QDRs, and for the audience, the Quadrennial Defense Review. That was a huge effort, monolithic effort, to come forward with a study and an assessment on not just our force structure, but all the services, and then how we work together under Goldwater Nichols to make the best joint fighting force in the world. We did away with QDRs a few years ago. Do you think we should go back to them?
QDR was a good construct, and it did, in fact, cause the force as a joint force to think about what it is it was supposed to be carrying out. I think that's a good construct. I think the reason that we abandoned it is because it was very manpower and
I mean, it had whole staffs just dedicated to it,
doing nothing but that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that exact construct is what's needed. That type of thinking is exactly what we ought to be after.
Yeah.
And what it's a matter of saying the total capability that I need, as envisioned by this number of platforms with this number of weapons, requiring this amount of sustainment, that ought to be foundational. Absent that, we're always going to be reacting to the latest thing.
And it's hard to do that in a document like a national defense strategy that has like 18 pages or something, or 30 pages, and has no numbers in it whatsoever.
Well, and also changes constantly.
Every 2-4 years, yes.
Every few years. So I applaud the idea of a Center for Maritime Strategy, for example. I think that is a great thing. Also,
Thank you. We do too.
Yeah. Well, I thought I'd just throw that in there since I'm here at your house. But beyond that, trying to think about how to build a force without centering it in some sort of overall national strategy that generates requirements. I did a lot of N81 assessments, and we come up with the fallacy of misplaced precision. I mean, we will have analyzed to the nth degree some particular thing which is predicated on something that would never happen. So that's something that we have to get beyond.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of efforts ongoing besides the QDR, which is clearly defunct. It's not there yet. There was an effort in the last administration by the Secretary of the Navy to bring back the Strategic Studies Group to look at some of these strategic problems for the Navy. And, we've talked to that group last fall when they came over, or earlier this year when they came over. And Steve and I both hoped that would gain traction. Most recently, the N81 spaces were co-located with the old Deep Blue. Headed one of the original big brains in Deep Blue was Jim Stavridis, and he did a wonderful job thinking strategically about the Navy and power projection. That went away, and Steve and I read a NAV admin the other day that said there's a new group coming in called Dark Trident.
Dark Trident, yes.
We're not sure what that is, but they're advertising for a cadre of 06s, 05s who are strategic thinkers that can take on some of these problems for the Navy. So more to follow on that. It's an interesting moniker, Dark Trident, and we'll see how much of Dark Trident and their work is actually revealed to the outside community. We'll be watching that. One last question before we go to Steve on small combatants, and that is, with this big, beautiful bill, which we have followed carefully, there's a lot of money in there for ship construction, SCN.
Right.
But the way the Navy did it was they have bills to pay for manpower. They have bills to pay for OMN, operations and maintenance, and these activities that are taking place all over the world, whether it's deterring Iran or deterring the Houthis in the Red Sea, which is probably costing us a pretty penny. The Navy has a three-legged stool. So it's manpower, it's OMN, and it's SCN. So they fully funded OMN and manpower, and they deferred on SCN. It was about, to get what we need to get to the numbers in NAV Plan 2024, you need about $38.5 billion. That was shortchanged in the Navy budget to about $18.5 billion, and the rest was made up in the reconciliation budget, which is great. So it gets you up to $38.5 billion or $40 billion. That's a lot of money, and that's more than we've seen in a long time. But reconciliation is short-lived.
It is.
It's only a couple of years, and then you got to do it again in 2027.
That's
And
the problem.
fingers crossed that happens. But if that money runs out, then we're going to be in a pickle. So that's just a comment. Let me kick it over to Steve, who is a disciple of Wayne Hughes, who talks to our surface ships and small combatants office all the time. And Steve, over to you to talk about force structure and the value of small combatants. A little bit on LCS, a little bit on where we're going, a little bit on unmanned.
Hey, thanks, sir. No, and there's continuing discussion about sort of the low end of the Navy's high-low mix and what that should look like. And even absent a coherent strategy, there's a lot of discussion about this. We saw the whole LCS program that got tacked on to the largely defunct SC-21 family of ships. That was our attempt to build the last surface warfare fleet, which was the CGX cruiser that didn't happen, the DDG-1000, which we got 3 instead of 30, and then we got LCS. And that has not turned out, as Admiral Foggo said, according to plan for a lot of reasons. We've got frigate out there that's got some challenges too, and we'll talk about that. There are a lot of people out there that want to build this strategic concept from the bottom up too, and that's where the Wayne Hughes and his disciples come in. They've actually got a new book out at Naval War College Review right now, Essays in Honor of Wayne Hughes. Check that out and you'll understand more about what he's doing. But there's a whole idea where if warfare is dependent on missiles rather than aircraft from aircraft carriers, missiles from submarines, missiles from surface ships, and we want to get more distributive, how do we make that happen? Or is that a distraction from thinking more globally, as you said, about a strategy that then lays out what forces we have?
I think undue focus on just the missile exchange ratios, which is not what Wayne Hughes said to do, but which is the way it often gets portrayed, is not a good way to think about the threat. Certainly, you want to fire effectively first. You want to have the deepest magazine. All that is important to consider. But I think that when we talk about how do you use a Navy, it is probably not going to be for a couple of SAGs to get out in the middle of the ocean or in the littoral. He actually is very focused on littorals, but it's not going to be a exchange of missiles between SAGs. There's going to be a whole series of things where certainly surface ships play a role. I think the main argument for a smaller combatant is it costs so much to build and deploy a destroyer. And then if we run through the service life of the destroyer, having it do things that a smaller, less capable combatant could do, we are, in fact, burning our ability to respond. We've overlooked the ability to respond to the low end, and we're damaging the ability to respond to the high end because of readiness problems.
Sending destroyers to chase Somali pirates and the like.
We're using destroyers for CD operations. I do not dispute the importance of CD operations. I mean, you can go back and forth about that. But fact is, that is exactly the kind of thing that a frigate or LCS or even some other type of craft could perform. And in the process, we deploy DDGs. We create a demand for parts. We make it. We complicate the maintenance schedules. There's a lot of different things that happen. So I wouldn't say worrying about or trying to create a capability for a missile flotilla is a bad thing. It's just I think that that's less important than the ability to routinely project power in conflicts short of war. Situations short of that don't require the full capability of a surface combatant.
Makes sense. And you pointed out too in other forums that the majority of, say, the Chinese missile capability is located in land and air-based weapon systems and not afloat anyhow where you can get at them.
Well, yeah, the exchange ratio for the Chinese firing out of China is always going to be considerably greater than we can do with any combination of afloat capabilities. So I think that what we're trying to avoid is a situation where we get into that kind of missile exchange. The trouble is, if we don't have the right force structure, end up with a situation of do nothing
Mm-hmm.
or do everything.
Yes.
And we both know enough about the history of the Cold War to know that that was exactly the situation they were trying to avoid.
Exactly.
In Western Europe, that we didn't just want to, the argument of you would never sacrifice New York for Berlin.
Yes.
Well, the idea became, well, maybe not, but let's build up a lot of things that allow bargaining and off ramps and things like that. I think one of the problems is that the Navy frequently does not get adequate credit for how much it was doing in the Cold War.
Absolutely.
In that context. I think there are in the routine deployments into the Mediterranean by Navy carrier battle groups, what we call back in those days, or the presence of a carrier in the North Arabian Sea, or worldwide, was having an effect on the ability to manage disputes. And I don't think that we always think enough about that.
Absolutely, yes. And certainly the guy who founded N81, Admiral Zumwalt, came up with this idea that we ought to have this balanced high-low fleet because ships only last so long. And what I'll do here now is kick it back to Admiral Foggo, because our next question we wanted to talk about was life expectancy of these ships, how long they're going to be, and how do we affect planning to make that happen.
You are listening to Maritime Nation, the Center for Maritime Strategies podcast designed to dive deeply into the policy challenges facing America's sea services and the role of the United States as a sea power on the global stage. We aim to provide you with the highest quality analysis on the most pressing maritime security challenges by joining in conversation with key experts and practitioners. This season is produced with support from Dataminr. Dataminr is recognized as one of the world's leading AI businesses. The company's clients are the first to know about high-impact events and emerging risks so they can mitigate and manage crises more effectively. Dataminr solutions are relied on 24/7 by hundreds of clients, including the Department of Defense, in over 100 countries across 6 continents to help them solve real-world problems. Here at CMS, our whole team uses Dataminr's First Alert to stay up to date on breaking news or crises that impact our national security or the security of our allies and partners.
So, sir, back to you.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Before I go there, I think it'd be interesting. You talk about Wayne Hughes. There's another great Wayne out there in surface warfare community lore, Wayne Meyer. I learned a lot about him when I worked for Admiral Mullen because he was a mentor and obviously the godfather of Aegis. So Wayne Meyer is to Aegis what Hyman Rickover is to nuclear power in the Navy. But I don't know that folks in our audience that are not surface warfare officers who have studied this know who Wayne Hughes is, and he recently passed. Admiral Meyer, we lost him several years ago, but what was Wayne Hughes's background and origins, and how did he get to be so famous in terms of, his oratory and his written work on Navy force structure?
Well, Steve and I can share the answer to that, but Wayne Hughes spent a good portion of his career as a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School, where he taught operations research. Interesting thing is he did not have advanced degrees in any of that work, but he spent a lot of time working through exchange ratios, missile exchange ratios, and the importance of attacking effectively first as being the thing that you're most the thing that wins a sea battle. He pointed out a lot of characteristics that make sea power unique, and he did point out that when battles occur, they tend to be somewhat total in nature. It's not like they're
not a land battle.
Not a land battle. He was a surface warfare officer. He commanded a minesweeper and I believe a destroyer.
Yes.
And clearly had a lot of operational knowledge. But his really big contribution was to teach essentially a generation of operations researchers the theory of missile exchange ratios, which, as far as they go, are completely valid. I just think, again, the problem that we run into is if you focus too much on that particular thing, you lose the rest of what the fleet is supposed to do, which is something different. And Steve, you probably have some additional.
Wayne Hughes was one of the original, I think, plank owners of what Admiral Zumwalt created as then Op 96, which later did become N81 to some degree too. And that's when the analysis discipline migrated from McNamara's OSD into the services themselves. So as Hughes says in one of his own reports from a number of years ago, he said, I was excited to join this group because we were going to make decisions based on analysis. And we hadn't been able to do that before. So that's kind of what he brought. And again, he's part of this thinking sort of bottom up that, hey, if we can win all the battles with these missile exchange rates, and maybe we can win the war. But the challenge here is every war is a bit different, and you have to have an opponent that looks like you with a fleet that you want to sink. And if they don't bring their fleet out, then that's a problem, especially if their power is resident on land or in their air force. And then it becomes a different equation.
There's a fair chance that if we were fighting the Battle of the Taiwan Straits, that China wouldn't try to use to project its Navy. It would certainly have to use its Navy to enable an amphibious assault.
Yes.
But that's a fairly limited, well-protected path. If they decided to meet the United States Navy in the open ocean right now, they'd lose. Decisively.
Agreed. Yeah.
So the problem then becomes, if you just scale the Navy solely to fight that battle, you'll miss most of the things that the Navy really needs to do and has historically done.
Yes.
And back to its origins.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, thanks for the background on Wayne Hughes for the audience. I did not know of him until I became director of N81, and as a result of the way the diaspora of that community was formed, 80 officers and civilians in N81 in the Pentagon. I don't know how many are there now. I think they've downsized it, but pretty much everybody was either an OR or an OA graduate of the Naval Postgraduate School. So operations research or operations analysis. And if I'm not mistaken, Admiral Mullen was an operations research graduate of NPGS. And everybody knew who Wayne Hughes was, and they'd all read his stuff. So I had to get up to speed quickly. So thanks, gents, for that. Let's talk about expected service life for Navy combatants. Typically 30 years for a destroyer. For a submarine, some of our submarines have been extended out to 40. We're operating the SSGNs. We've extended the whole life of the Tridents, and we've continued to maintain them. In fact, one of the SSGNs, by public admission of OSD, took part in the most recent raid on Iran with Tomahawk missiles, a raid of Tomahawk missiles, and was very successful. So it's a great testament to the ability of our industrial base to maintain these ships at or beyond 30 years. Life cycle for a carrier is 50 years. One of the things that concerns me is back, at the time of the Nimitz class, we were on something called 4-year centers. So if you have a 50-year platform and you do the math, that gets you about 12 carriers. That's 48 years and some change. So you can operate a fleet of 12 carriers, and then as that oldest carrier decommissions, you're building a new one on a 4-year center. We allowed that to lapse to 5-year centers.
Right.
And in a 50-year life cycle, that means you have 10 carriers. And I'm afraid that we are moving towards a 7-year center, which means 7 carriers. 7 times 7 is 49. And clearly, we don't have enough now to meet the global demand. So I don't know what we're going to do if we allow those numbers to drop to 7, and I hope we don't. When I was up in grad school in Cambridge, there was a guy that used to publish a book. I never took his class, William Kaufman. It was called A Thoroughly Efficient Navy, and it was how you get a 15-carrier punch out of a 12-carrier or an 8-carrier battle force. He was always arguing about how do we cut the budget, save money, and still get the same impact. He was a faculty advisor of Dr. Ash Carter. And while I was at N81, we did the Enhanced Carrier Presence study for Dr. Carter. That was a long study. It was run by Admiral Greenert, and it looked at different ways to get more bang for the buck. out of a 12 carrier force because Dr. Carter didn't feel that he was getting enough A0 out of those carriers. And we helped him understand the difficulty of the maintenance cycle for these carriers and how complex they are to operate. And he tried to help the Navy by writing a check and giving us some more money. So, we're back to the future. We're in the same grind today with our industrial base. And as we've gone through strategy from the 1990s to present, we got involved in the global war on terror, and we took our eye off the ball. And we had our boots and our heads in the sands of Afghanistan and Iraq. And meanwhile, the Chinese were surging ahead with their naval arms race. And so is a 30-year hull life or a 50-year hull life the right answer? The Dutch, for example, when I was in Europe, they would build a command ship to ABS standards, commercial standards. This was not a combat-hardened ship, and they plan on having it for about 15 years, and then their plan was to sell it. And they'd be able to recapitalize with some of the profits off of that ship. So it was still a pretty good ship. And we don't think that way. Ours is 30 years, and that's it, because that's the way we've always done it. Should we be in a different life cycle, life expectancy?
We absolutely should be doing that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that Korea is so successful as a commercial shipbuilder is that the exact model they have is we will build something that's going to last for 7 years, and then it's going to be sold onto the aftermarket.
7 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and that's big commercial ships.
Yeah.
It's not Navy ships, which is a little different model. But yes, you can buy a hull, you can put all kinds of expensive things on it, and you can make it. We have the ability to make these things last a long time. With aircraft carriers, that was a pretty good solution because an aircraft carrier could accommodate multiple changes in aviation.
Generations of different aircraft.
Aircraft. When I was on Midway, we went from F4s to F-18s, and then now
big change.
And then subsequent carriers are getting F-35s. So that made some sense for that. But the fact is, you can't get something for nothing. And that is something the Navy has been assured multiple times that it can do, but it just can't do it. The problems with aircraft carrier service life tend to be with external corrosion, and it's often at the waterline. And the issue with it is not so much the age, it's kind of where it's been sitting. And when that happens, that carrier, it has historically happened, extended in the shipyard because they got to fix all this waterline corrosion. Now we get into the propulsion plant, and the nuclear enterprise knows how to manage that pretty well.
Yeah.
But what we are trying to do is keep running something that was built on a legacy set of technologies. We try to upgrade it, often we don't. And what we often end up with 20 years into a ship service life is it's got bespoke systems that nobody in the commercial sector has ever seen or knows how to replace.
Or remembers.
And so you end up with people working on things that ought to have been modernized but are not, because that's not the culture. The culture is to try to keep the thing running. So, low pressure air compressors with
LPACs,
LPACs with analog controls and so forth. Well, there's really no reason that we ought to be, any DDG ought to be running around out there with a legacy LPAC. Now, my background being amphibious, we always got the oldest and the worst of everything. And we had people that knew how to work on it. But if regular demand is established, a plan that involves regular modernization, a plan which is realistic about the facts of demography and doesn't try to put 350 people on a DDG, for example, or something of that nature, that can be made to work, and that can strengthen the industrial base, and it can, in fact, be a way forward that doesn't require us to try to keep things around that were really never designed to last as long as they have. And I'll give you one example. I was Confibron 7 a few years back, and one of our ships was the Denver. And the Denver was at like the 38, 39-year point in its service life
Is
at
that
that
LSD?
point. LPD.
LPD.
Austin class LPD. And they spent something like $60 million. The Navy, NAVSEA spent about $60 million upgrading it to a different set of, a different generation of SSDGs. Okay, all good, all fine. But the service life left in that ship could not match the investment in buying new generation capabilities. So fundamentally, that turned into a money sink, and it took them a while to get them out of the yard and all the rest of it. So we have to change. We have to think differently about service life.
Yeah, I mean, in the early bird this morning, and in Admiral Caudle's testimony yesterday, one of the submarines that has raised eyebrows is the USS Boise. And, she's been alongside for about 7 years. The Navy's tried to figure out where we're going to get the money to do an overhaul, and where is the dry dock capable of receiving the ship and doing this. And one of the questions he was asked is, are you going to make a tough decision on the future of USS Boise, either, fix it or decommission? And he promised to look into that very carefully, and we'll see what that decision is for the future. Obviously, we have a lot of ships that are like that. Our inventory is getting older, and although capable and although fully capable of fighting a war, today with the Chinese, as you said, in an open ocean, that would be an unfair battle. The Chinese would be defeated. But when you're talking about something inside the first island chain, Straits of Taiwan sort of thing, then that would be a much tougher fight. Steve, neither Steve nor I are critics of the littoral combat ship. We believe that it has a purpose and a function. It's had a difficult history over the course of its development and the building of these ships. Some have been decommissioned, some have had propulsion problems. When I was in Europe, I used to, solicit from Admiral Gilday. I said, send me those ships. I had joint high-speed vessels that were renamed EPFs that were supposed to act like a frigate. I never really thought they were anywhere near a frigate. Simpson was the last Oliver Hazard Perry-class frigate before she was decommissioned, and was the last frigate in my theater when I was 6th Fleet Commander. Loved that ship. Had her doing the kinds of things you were talking about, independence ops off of Africa, off of North Africa, in the Arabian Gulf, and it was just a very capable unitary deployer. You didn't burn a lot of gas and a lot of modernization and readiness using a destroyer to do the kinds of things that the frigate did, and did quite well. I always say it was astonishing. It was the only ship in all of my time in Naples, Italy, as a 1-star, 3-star, 4-star, that had 0 CAS reps at the end of a deployment. And that was a great credit to the ship, the people on board who kept her fit. But, she met all mission requirements and was in great shape when we sent her home and decommissioned. So, LCS for me would have been great. I could have used her for all sorts of theater security cooperation missions. But like I said, it's had a tough history. And Steve, you know more about this than I do, but let's talk a little bit about littoral combat ship and the value of future ship programs.
And especially the lessons learned. Hopefully the Navy's learned some lessons from its LCS experience, and maybe you could add those too.
Okay. Well,
that's a big dose.
No, that's fine. I have been, I'll give a bit of personal history. I am one of the few people in the United States Navy to have done 2 tours of mine warfare and made it all the way to 06, because that was kind of a tough career path for most people. So
it is.
Mine warfare and amphibs have been what I did. LCS, had it been delivered in quantity about 2011, would have been a godsend. There were all kinds of missions that I myself was commanding, trying to perform, like OPLAT defense, the chasing of pirates off Somalia, the MCM mission. All of those things would have been really good, would have been a very good fit for LCS. The problem was for one thing, I don't think they thought through, the Navy thought through the sustainment concept real well. And I don't think it thought through what it was going to take to actually keep these things operating. I think that's one thing. I think another thing is that there were a lot of experimental things being tried at the same time.
Yes.
And this is a theme that we also see with the USS Ford, is that if you try to do a lot of different things, you're going to do rotational crews, you're going to do modular system replacements, you're going to rely a lot on COTS and all that type of thing. If you try to do all that once, it's very hard for the system to actually adjust and deliver what's supposed to be delivered. So the lesson learned would be figure out what you do well and try doing that, rather than trying to create a lot of new processes to deal with something that you probably will not be able to do the first few times you try it. That would be one thing. Another thing would be the requirements process for LCS. I mean, I was actually in the requirements business as this thing was being, as mission packages and so forth were being thought through. The KPP, key performance parameter for speed, is one thing I never found a rational basis for. Why do you need this thing to go as fast as it?
Yeah, pretty fast.
Like 38 knots or something.
40 something, yeah.
Because anytime you add a performance characteristic like that, that stresses engineering. And then I guess the final thing I would say is LCS could have been a very good example of exactly the type of you introduce it, you use it for a while, then you dispose of it. And that would have been a very good use of that particular platform. As it is, though, we're going to have some of these things around, and they are going to be useful, and combatant commanders will love having them. But they're not what they were originally envisioned to be. The most successful version of it would appear to be essentially a replacement for the MCM class.
Yes.
But those would be.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is simplify. And, there's a big discussion nowadays amongst, folks like Ron O'Rourke, who Ron and Eric Labs, we love those guys. And they participate in a lot of our functions on modularity, trying to make, classes of ships very similar so that you can take a module from one and use it in another. So a common fire control system, a common weapon system, a common propulsion system that fits in a hull that is, obviously a destroyer is going to be bigger than a frigate, is bigger than an LCS, but you can actually gain some synergies and save some time in the developmental process as you're building a ship if you could become a little bit more like South Korea and how they build ships. That's the way they do it.
Yeah. I would say with LCS also, we went exactly the wrong direction when it came to coming up with commonality. And we built two completely different classes of ships, each with their own sets of characteristics. And I think that probably complicated and endangered the program to a degree.
We seem to ignore a basic rule, though, that the Navy had followed before, which is a more incremental development of ships. We saw that as you go from the Spruance-class destroyer in the 70s to the DDG-51, where it's a gradual introduction of new systems through a couple of different common hulls. And as you said, we put all these new systems on board, some of them on LCS, some of them failed testing. And if you fail testing, you got to come back, which means your program grows in length of time that it's being executed, and then it costs more money. So it's not surprising as you continue to fail these testings that the cost of your program is going to go up. And we certainly saw that with LCS.
Yeah, on the issue of speed, I mean, you put a lot of money, you had to not pay a lot of dollars to get that additional knot of speed. And LCS was designed to be very, very fast. When asked why, well, it's got to keep up with an aircraft carrier. Not so much in the age of distributed maritime operations where you aggregate and disaggregate the fleet around the crown jewel, which is the carrier. And I'll tell you a funny story quickly. Back in 2013, when I was working on the rules of behavior in the maritime domain with the PLA Navy, my introduction to the PLA Navy was to be the escort officer for 6 days for Chinese CNO Wu Shangli, who came to this country for a counterpart visit with Admiral Greener. And Admiral Greener met him in San Diego. I was out there, and we heloed out to a littoral combat ship. And Admiral Greener took him to the bridge, and I was standing there, and they ran the ship up to full speed. And Admiral Greener turns to Wu Shangli and says, "Take the deck and the con." Now, Wu understood English, but he wouldn't speak it. And so through his translator, he said, "No, thank you." And Admiral Greener said, "I'm giving you an opportunity to drive this ship, which is going very fast out here in the open ocean." And Wu's comment was something like, "Sure, I'll take the deck and the con, then we'll run aground and you will blame me." And, of course, there was no shoal water anywhere near. It was an excuse not to do it. I don't think it would have been a good optic for him, but I thought that was funny. And we probably didn't need all that speed and probably could have saved a lot of money and used the ship for those missions that you talked about. Let's move on to current operations, South China Sea, Straits of Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
One of our favorite professors in Halsey Alpha at the War College is Dr. Jim Fitzsimmons. And he has done war game after war game and iteration after iteration of conflict with China. And his concern is that we're being outsticked with long-range precision-guided munitions. So it's not so much the force structure and number of ships as it is the munitions. And the DF-21 and DF-26, some people call them the carrier killer missile. We got to figure out how to operate in that environment. Is that doable in your mind?
We've been outsticked in distance and ranges since I was an ensign. I mean, that was one of the things that we were always dealing with when we thought about the Soviet threat. The Soviet Navy.
Yeah, it was always Harpoon, and Harpoon was never good enough.
Harpoon was never good enough, and they were firing AS-4s and so forth, and that was among the reasons we developed F-14s, Phoenix missiles, all those types of things. And so I don't mean to dismiss the hazard that goes with being outsticked, but I would say it's not a new condition. I'd say what we have to think about with, as far as carriers go, is how would we use them in this type of war? And we'd be talking about having to generate a lot of sorties in order to actually affect the battle. And if they are kept at distance, the problem will be not being able to keep aircraft over Taiwan for more than a couple hours at a time. So I think that's one of the things that will have to be worked around. The idea of pulsing, we can do a lot launch a lot of sorties and do a lot of things if we suppressed for a while the Chinese ability to respond. But I think that we ultimately have to deal with sinking the Chinese invasion fleet is probably not going to be that difficult, frankly, between long-range missiles and submarines and all those types of things. The problem comes after the initial invasion. Let's assume that China has made some sort of lodgment. So we're now fighting the air battle of Taiwan, which means we have to generate a lot of sorties to counter their sorties, because otherwise they have almost uncontested air superiority. In that type of situation, it's going to be difficult for Taiwan to survive. So you probably keep the carriers out a bit in the early stages, but then when we start getting to the point where we have to sink reinforcement shipping and fight the Chinese sorties that are being generated out of the mainland, that probably means we're going to have to attrite they're firing their missiles too, so they're losing some of their missiles. We're going to have to get really good at EW and suppressing ISR and all the rest of it. Then we're going to have to, inevitably, the carriers are going to have to be brought in closer, because otherwise they're irrelevant to the battle, and it won't be the strike piece, it'll be the air-to-air piece that becomes a problem.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it in those terms. I was always more focused on the vulnerabilities because of the strategic rocket forces in China, and they got a lot of them.
They do.
They got a lot of volume, more than we do, outside the second island chain, because their reach is, with the DF-26 is out there.
Well, it certainly is, and I wouldn't discount that. But let's assume the war is going to go on for longer than 2 weeks.
Yes.
It's going to go on for some number of months. And what ultimately becomes the point of the battle is
Air superiority.
air superiority.
Yeah.
China, it certainly has a lot of anti-carrier rockets. It's got a massive number of rockets, aircraft, ASC, or cruise missiles and so forth, that can be launched at bases in Japan, which is where you're trying to generate a lot of these aircraft sorties.
Yes.
So pulsing is good, but the pulsing has to be done in such a way that there's a relatively constant presence of a carrier somewhere near enough to have F-35s fly over the island, do air-to-air, and return to the ship.
It starts to look a lot like Admiral Sandy Woodford. I always mispronounce his name. Woodward's battle at the Falklands, where he kept his aircraft carriers at absolute maximum range away to protect them, but he's also trying to generate, as you said, air superiority over the islands to support the ground combat there. And his ground guys got angry at him because they never had enough air, but he said, hey, I have to protect the air base.
Well, and the Chinese problem for dominate air superiority over Taiwan is much, much easier than the Argentinians had over the Falklands. I mean, they are 90 miles away. They've got hundreds of aircraft.
Exactly.
And plus...
Tyranny of distance and inability to defend their own turf, and then our ability to project power all factor into the equation. Just to round things out here, NAV Plan 2024, launched by Admiral Franchetti, embraced by Admiral Kilby, and we'll see what tweaks Admiral Caudle wants to make when he's confirmed. Calls for a number of ships, 381 manned platforms and 134 unmanned. It's an interesting mix, 381, not 380, and 134 for a total of 515 naval platforms.
Right.
Even with the generosity of the reconciliation bill and the big, beautiful bill, as an analyst who looks at these problems, can we get there?
No, probably not. No, I will just say that I don't want to be unduly negative about what it is that the administration is trying to do. I support the idea of a larger Navy. It is important that we do that.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah, we do. But we have to look at shipyard capacity.
Yes.
We have to look at how long it can actually keep ships in service. We have to look at where we're going to get the manning. All those things together make 381 manned platforms difficult to envision. Now, we can do some things about reducing crew sizes and things of that nature, but to get to that number, we're going to have to change the force composition considerably. Now, we start talking about the unmanned piece. Unmanned, if you want to fight the Wayne Hughes attack effectively first, unmanned is the way to go.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And that is one place I think it could be very useful.
Yes.
And there's a number of uses that there are places we wouldn't typically put a destroyer that we would probably feel fairly comfortable putting some number of USVs in the mix. For example, in the first island chain, in IMCON, they're not going to be all that easy to find. And if they're there, they're adding. The whole point of DMO is to create lots of threat vectors for the enemy to worry about. So the 381 I don't think is probably achievable. The 114 is achievable. We probably need to think about changing the ratio a little bit more toward the unmanned. And we really, really need to determine what it is we want those 381 ships to do. And if it's fight the Battle of the Taiwan Strait, that's one force structure. If it's function as a worldwide Navy capable of reacting to crises in a lot of different areas, it looks different.
Absolutely. Steve, over to you. Final thoughts.
Yes. So you've written about this in the force structure paper that we have here. And in particular, are there any recommendations you want to highlight from the paper to make some of the improvements? Understanding it's going to be a challenge to get to the man figure. Is there anything in there that recommends?
Well, first, what we've talked about,
Okay.
A lot is determine what it is that we want the Navy to do. We need to carefully think about where has theater security cooperation been important to us. Now, the Admiral was responsible for an AOR, two of them actually, where
That's a big deal.
TSC engagement is really an important part of managing that
Huge.
environment.
Huge. Yeah.
And I think matching what we need in peacetime, what we need in crisis response to what the force structure looks like is a really important piece. And that's part of the overall strategic vision. The strategic vision is something like, if I want to affect the future of Africa, I want to be able to interact with Ghanaian,
Exactly.
Fishermen, Coast Guardsmen, that type of thing. I need to know whether Morocco values having a Navy ship come in, or whether probably not all that much, because they have so much normal interaction with everybody else. That may not be a big deal there. Having a ship visit South Africa would be huge. And so understanding how all that stuff might work together is one thing. And that's one of the recommendations of the report. Another is we really must put sustainment into this from the very beginning. And that is not done. What happens is a program manager is supposed to be delivering a ship. I'm going to deliver LPD 33, and I want to deliver it on time, on cost, and that's the way it works. If something like painting all the tanks with a higher quality paint could be done at ship construction, it would add to the cost of the ship as it's being built. Conceivably, could even add some time, but it would most certainly save in sustainment costs. Over many years.
And we don't think
I hear that all the
50
time.
years,
Tank maintenance. You go into a tank, you don't know what you're going to expect when you get in there, and then you find something corrosion, and all stop. Now you got to go back and do replanning and rework, and it takes a long. Tank maintenance is a big pain. So if you could preserve it for the life of the platform or half the life of the platform, boy, that'd be big, huge. And I got to believe we could do that with polymers nowadays.
There's really all kinds of paints that could be made to work, and they are typically, and one thing that, as you no doubt know, perusing the media, the fact that ships look rusty has been something that has created a lot of churn.
It's got presidential attention.
Presidential attention. Well, one way of dealing with that is, the way we will deal with it is we will yell at the crew to do a better job.
Right.
The right way to deal with it is to paint it better in the first place.
That's right.
Equip them better, yes.
But I think those would be two of the big ones.
Okay.
And a lot of things flow from that, but I think those are my big takeaways.
No, we can't break your sustainment cycle either. We overrun it by keeping ships deployed longer because of that shrinking, aging force structure that you talked about.
The vicious cycle is, I was supposed to deploy the USS Ashland, LSD, and I was supposed to deploy it, but I couldn't deploy it because when they opened the tanks, there weren't 4 ballast tanks. There was actually one great big ballast tank because the corrosion was so bad. So I had to keep that ship in the yard for an extra year, which sometimes happens. And so the maintenance cycles either deal with a gap or you deal with lengthening the deployments. And so nobody ever gets any better. And so I think that's where we are now.
Yeah, just for the benefit of our viewers, small factoid, but on tank maintenance, when you're a junior officer, on a submarine, typically you get the dubious honor of closing out a tank and making that final inspection to make sure there's no tools left in the tank that would clog a pump or a system or a suction valve or something. And it's closed out properly and it's sealed properly so it doesn't leak. And it was a kind of an epiphany for me to make the determination with my olfactory system, my nose, that a freshwater tank smelled a heck of a lot worse than a sanitary tank.
Yeah.
Because when you drain the freshwater tank, there's a natural tendency to grow algae in these tanks.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't affect the quality of the water. But when that algae gets warm and there's no water in the medium, it dies and it decays and it just smells terrible. You got to pressure wash it all off. But just a funny factoid. We're all amongst naval officers here, and I guess my final point is I always believe the glass is half full. I have tremendous confidence in our Navy, and especially our magnificent sailors that are deployed around the world. And, you know, the final question is kind of rhetorical. Can our Navy win the next war? Our motto on our coin is Semper Invictus, and that means always undefeated, and we represent the sea services, and I think they will prevail. And comments from you on that, Brad?
Well, I feel a bit emotional about the U.S. Navy, which is not something
we all do.
Yeah. I absolutely believe that sailors will always try their best, do everything that's necessary to actually win the war. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite people, I don't even know the man's name, but on the USS Stark, there was a gunner's mate sitting down in a magazine holding a hose trying to keep Standard missiles from cooking off. Right. And that's the kind of heroism that you see every day from U.S. Navy sailors. With that said, I think we, as people who are trying to influence the discussion, need to find a way to give them the tools to do to become victorious.
Absolutely.
And I think that I welcome. I very much support the types of things that you're trying to do as far as raising the issue. My final thought on this is I never trust somebody who's never had to get 10 people together for the duty working party.
That's very true. Yes, indeed.
And so my desire to see things get better is tempered by the fact that things are hard.
Yeah, you know, last thing I'll say on the duty working party, I was down in Norfolk a while back. There was a reception on board the Italian ship, Frem-class frigate Carabinieri, and the CO had been the EA to the Italian Chief of Naval Operations, and I knew him when I was in Naples because I went back and forth to Rome to talk to our host nation all the time. And he'd come across the Atlantic. He had certified with the Area Trim Strike Group for a cooperative deployment. Done a great job, beautiful ship. So I'm leaving the Brow and I'm walking across the pier to go to my car, and there's a bunch of sailors standing outside the brand new USS New Jersey. So I went over, male and female, and talked to them. And there's about 10 sailors. They didn't know who I was. They had no idea who I was, and I wouldn't expect them to. But I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And they all looked at me and said, "Great, sir. How are you?" You know, the sun was going down. It was nighttime. Things were kind of chilled out on the boat after the daily routine. And I said, "Are you guys all on board New Jersey?" And they said, "Yes, sir." And I go, "How do you like it?" And what I expected to hear was, a little bit of Sailor Bob and a little bit of bitching about this or that, or, chain of command or duty schedule or work. Because new commissioned ship, it was later commissioned by Carlos del Toro up in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. I didn't hear one negative comment. In fact, they told me how much they loved being on board. Mm-hmm. They were staying in the Navy, and the chain of command on that ship obviously was doing a great job because they love the leadership. And that made me feel great and even more motivated to fight for our Navy. So, folks, that's a wrap. Thank you to Dr. Brad Martin for joining Maritime Nation. I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us each month. If you haven't heard our previous episodes, you can always catch up on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And all content described here today can be found on our website, www.centerformaritimestrategy.org. Thanks again to Dataminr for the sponsorship and support, and our sound engineer behind the scenes, James Peterson. Stay tuned for the next episode of Maritime Nation.